Russia has launched one of the largest coordinated missile and drone assaults on Ukraine's energy grid since the start of the full-scale war. Overnight, waves of Russian drones and long-range missiles struck multiple power stations, transmission lines, and energy hubs across the country, plunging several regions into darkness and forcing nationwide electricity restrictions. According to Ukrainian authorities, the scale of this latest barrage was unprecedented. Over 650 drones and more than 50 cruise and ballistic missiles were launched within hours, targeting both civilian and energy infrastructure. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that while most of the incoming threats were intercepted, dozens still broke through, hitting key facilities and causing widespread damage. At least 7 civilians have been confirmed dead so far, including one child, with dozens injured. Several hospitals and residential buildings have sustained damage. Emergency crews are struggling to restore power and assist those trapped under debris. The worst damage has been reported in Zaporizhia, Dnipropetrovsk, and Donetsk regions, areas already suffering from months of shelling and airstrikes. Welcome back to Ballistic Beacon. Please subscribe and like the video for more real-time defense updates. This strike represents a significant escalation in Russia's strategy against Ukraine. Rather than focusing on battlefield targets, the Russian military is now systematically targeting the country's critical infrastructure, attempting to cripple Ukraine's power grid ahead of the harsh winter months. This marks a repeat of last year's winter campaign, but on an even larger scale. By striking power plants and grid transmission hubs, Moscow aims to push Ukraine's energy system toward collapse. Ukrainian energy company officials have described this as the most severe and deliberate attack on the grid in months. The resulting blackouts have affected millions of civilians, cutting power to homes, hospitals, and transport networks. The attacks are also designed to overload Ukraine's air defense network. Russia used a combination of Iranian-made Shahd drones, Kh-101 cruise missiles, and Iskander ballistic missiles launched from both ground and sea platforms. By mixing trajectories and altitudes, the Kremlin's forces attempted to saturate Ukrainian defenses, forcing Kyiv to expend precious interceptor missiles. Ukraine's air defense systems successfully downed a majority of the incoming weapons, but given the volume of attacks, complete interception was impossible. Kyiv city administration confirmed that fragments from intercepted missiles caused secondary fires in several districts, damaging residential blocks and vehicles. Across the nation, power substations and transmission corridors sustained direct hits. Thermal power plants in eastern and central Ukraine were taken offline due to extensive damage, while emergency shutdowns were introduced in multiple regions. Officials warned that restoring full power supply could take days, and some areas might face scheduled blackouts throughout the winter. The Ukrainian Ministry of Energy announced that electricity exports to neighboring countries have been suspended indefinitely. Priority will now be given to hospitals, water, pumping stations, and heating facilities. Authorities are urging citizens to conserve energy and prepare for longer outages as the grid stabilization process continues. On the battlefield, these strikes coincide with heavy Russian ground offensives near Pokrovsk and the Donetsk front. Analysts believe this timing is deliberate, an attempt to stretch Ukraine's military resources between defending front lines and managing internal chaos caused by infrastructure loss. This two-pronged approach could weaken Ukraine's defensive posture over the winter period. Energy experts describe the current damage as critical, but not yet catastrophic. However, repeated attacks of similar scale could push Ukraine's grid into systemic failure. If several major thermal stations or transmission corridors are permanently damaged, Ukraine could face rolling blackouts lasting weeks. For civilians, the situation is increasingly dire. Power cuts affect heating, water purification, and communications. With temperatures already dropping, humanitarian agencies warn of potential displacement and medical emergencies in areas unable to maintain heating for vulnerable populations. Hospitals are switching to backup generators, but fuel reserves remain limited in some regions. International reaction has been swift. Western governments have condemned the strikes as deliberate attempts to terrorize civilians. The European Union and the United States have pledged to expedite the delivery of additional air defense systems, including more Patriot batteries and NASAMS units. Several NATO countries are also coordinating emergency shipments of generators and energy equipment to Ukraine. Ukraine's prime minister stated that the government is prioritizing rapid repair operations and deploying mobile repair teams to affected regions. However, he warned that the continued bombardment poses a serious challenge. Each time we repair a substation, it is targeted again the next night. The broader aim of these strikes appears clear: to undermine Ukrainian morale and force the population into hardship. By targeting essential services, Moscow hopes to create social pressure that could weaken the country's internal stability and military focus. Historically, however, such strategies have often had the opposite effect, hardening national resistance and international resolve. Ukraine's air defense network continues to adapt. New radar systems and Western-supplied interceptors have improved interception rates significantly since early 2023. However, with each large-scale attack, the stockpile of interceptors diminishes rapidly. Ukraine is now appealing to Western allies for immediate replenishment of missiles and spare parts for radar systems. Satellite imagery released this morning shows several large fires still burning near the Zaporizhzhia region, where two major power facilities were hit. Ukrainian emergency services are attempting to contain the fires while ensuring the safety of nearby nuclear facilities, including the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which remains under Russian control. Officials confirmed that the plant's safety systems were not affected by last night's strike. Economically, the damage is estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Industrial zones dependent on stable power such as metallurgy, chemicals, and transport sectors are facing shutdowns. Ukrainian rail services in central and eastern regions have reduced operations, prioritizing evacuation and humanitarian transport. Diplomatically, Kyiv has renewed its calls for stronger sanctions against Russia's energy and missile production sectors. Officials are urging Western nations to block exports of microchips, engine parts, and navigation components that Russia allegedly uses to build its missiles. There is also renewed discussion among NATO allies about deploying more advanced counter-drone technologies to Ukraine, including laser and electronic jamming systems. In Moscow, Russian state media has described the strikes as retaliatory precision attacks on what they claim were military-related energy nodes. This framing attempts to justify the strikes under military necessity, despite overwhelming evidence that civilian areas and purely civilian infrastructure were among the targets. From a strategic perspective, the attacks highlight the continued evolution of hybrid warfare, combining direct military pressure with infrastructure sabotage and information warfare. Russia's intent is to extend the battlefield deep into Ukraine's civilian heartland, turning energy and morale into instruments of war. In response, Ukraine is accelerating efforts to decentralize its power grid. Plans are underway to increase localized solar and wind generation and to create smaller, mobile power clusters less vulnerable to large-scale outages. Western partners are assisting with technical support and spare equipment to boost grid resilience. For ordinary Ukrainians, the coming winter will likely be one of endurance. Local authorities are setting up invincibility centers, heated shelters equipped with generators, internet access, and food supplies. These centers proved crucial during last year's winter attacks and are now being expanded nationwide. Humanitarian organizations, including the Red Cross and UN agencies, are preparing emergency relief operations focused on heating supplies, blankets, and portable generators. The government has asked citizens to store essential supplies and remain prepared for prolonged outages if strikes continue. Military analysts note that Russia's strategy is not without risk. Such high-volume attacks consume large quantities of missiles and drones, which are expensive to replace under current sanctions. Repeated barrages could strain Moscow's stockpiles, especially if Ukraine's air defenses continue to intercept a high percentage of incoming weapons. In the long term, targeting civilian infrastructure could also deepen Russia's international isolation. The strikes are likely to strengthen Western unity and accelerate deliveries of advanced weapons systems to Ukraine. Already, discussions are underway within NATO about expanding joint air defense coordination across Eastern Europe to counter similar threats. As the world watches, this latest escalation underscores the ongoing evolution of modern warfare, where energy networks, communication grids, and civilian infrastructure are as much battlefields as the front lines themselves. Ukraine now faces the dual challenge of defending its sovereignty on the battlefield and maintaining the resilience of its civilian population against an unprecedented campaign of infrastructure warfare. The coming weeks will determine whether its defenses, both military and societal, can withstand the pressure as winter approaches. Authorities have urged calm and cooperation, reminding citizens that power restoration efforts are ongoing around the clock. Despite the darkness, the message from Kiev remains resolute. The light will not go out, and the nation will endure. The situation continues to develop as Ukrainian emergency services assess damage and restore supply. Updates are expected throughout the day as international partners mobilize further support.